Clearly, human rights are under threat across all of Africa, and not even just Africa, but even internationally. We see that the international human rights system is beginning to be eroded by the actions of countries like Russia, Turkey, and the US itself. But even in Africa at home here, we have a situation where our so-called democracies that came about in the 90s are now beginning to be inching closer and closer towards autocracies. Presidents are beginning to ignore the idea of the rule of law, or beginning to repress political opposition or curtail down freedom of the press. And if you look at indices such as the Mo Ibrahim Index on Governance, or if you look at some of like the Economist Index on Human Rights and Governance, you would see that Nigeria really has a low score, and African countries in general have low scores on these indices. Well, there is enough research to indicate that there is a correlation between human rights, or systems that protect human rights and implement human rights, and high level of development. Because essentially the role of human rights is to create a path of good governance through the assurances of civil and political rights, and through the provision of economic, social, and cultural rights. Civil and political rights are the kind of rights that allow people to express themselves freely, to associate freely, to, in short, give ideas or be free about the ideas that they think in terms of their social development. In a society that doesn't protect civil and political rights, ideas of governance and ideas of development are going to be extremely limited, and the number of people who can participate in the conversation will be much more limited, meaning that there is likely to be lesser participation in economic sectors. Similarly, in economic and social, the provision of economic and social rights means that more people have a opportunity for self-development. The idea is that society provides a safety net for people who are unfortunate in ways that assures the collective good of everyone. If somebody is unable to afford education by themselves, there is education provided by the state. There is healthcare provided by the state. This in turn, of course, reduces the level of criminality in the society. It reduces the level of poverty, and ultimately means that there is more opportunity for even more social development. Nigerians have to care about human rights because at the end of the day, the essential role of any government in the protection of the welfare and security of its citizens is the promotion, protection, and respect of human rights. In the 1940s, the whole world came together and produced the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which essentially recognized that all persons are born equal and in dignity, and therefore the fundamental obligation of state is the protection of that equality, dignity, and its corresponding rights for every person. When people's rights are guaranteed, they are better able to secure their own welfare through the state. The use of state money in a way that respects human rights, what we call a human rights-based approach, is one that uses money for the purposes of protecting people's rights. And so human rights is not just an abstract idea that is somewhere in the books by lawyers. It is something that is fundamental to developed societies, and which those of us who want to join them at the table must begin to take seriously. We must not continue this idea where policies are determined solely by the idea of the president or the idea of the governor. No, they must be founded in a human rights-based approach to development. Sadly, as I speak right now, Nigeria's constitution does not take a human rights-based approach to the welfare of its citizens. In fact, the civil and political rights, which are in chapter 4 of the Constitution, are severely derogated from at the end of that section. It gives the government powers to make laws that take away from those civil and political rights. Even worse, the economic and social rights that are contained in chapter 2 of the Constitution are not enforceable. Nobody can go to a court to say, oh, the Constitution says that everybody has a right to health care or education or social welfare, and I want it to be done because this government is not spending its money that way. You cannot go to court and do that. Why? So we have a constitution that severely disables itself from being effective at actually catering to the welfare of society. The overall content of our constitution is not human rights, it's power. Power of the president, power of the legislator, power of the judiciary, the power of this, power of that, and the negotiation of power between different institutions and persons. And so at the end of the day, if we really do want to have a constitution that takes care of the people, we must begin to think in terms of a transformative constitution, one that bridges between the past and the future. If you have a constitution and our society is still the same thing 10 years after the constitution, 20 years after the constitution, then that is not a transformative constitution. It's a constitution that does absolutely nothing. Well, the great news is that right now a lot of Nigerians are already fed up with the current system. They have begun to see that the politics of every 4-year election may not necessarily take us anywhere. Since 1999 we have been having elections. By now people of my generation have seen 6 elections come and go, and yet has anything changed for them? For most people, no. Only politicians and their sycophants seem to be getting any better so far. For the majority of people, poverty is worsening, oppression is worsening. The struggle for survival is now distracting so many of us. We don't even have time to critique government or to even look for accountability in government. But this can change if people begin to understand again and again that the problem with Nigeria is systemic. It is not just one thing. It's not just power. It's not just transportation. It's not just education. It's everything. Everything is related. And when you yank on one, you pull on all the other. So if you have to change so many things in order to fix a system, then why not just change the system? And that is the goal of a transformative constitution, to change society and change the political system.